Hi everybody, and welcome back to the next episode of Album Analysis. Today we will be talking about Double Fantasy, which was an album by John Lennon and Yoko Ono. It was released in 1980. It was the last album to be released while John Lennon was still alive, and I have it right here. It's a little bit cracked up. It's been well loved, but here it is. As you can see, they're kissing on the cover. And so we're just going to kind of go song by song. I do want to kind of look at this in the sort of prism of some ideas of marriage and family therapy, as that's actually what I'm trained in. I have an MA in marriage and family therapy, which is also known as MFT. Anyway, so we're going to kind of look at that a little bit through that lens. There's also an interesting thing about this album, just to set the scene with it, is that this was the album that was released after Lennon was out of the music business for 5 years, raising his younger son Sean as a house husband. So during the time that he was out of the spotlight, a lot of people were asking, when's he going to come back? And he kind of sort of said that he didn't really want to. But then he ultimately ended up deciding to do this album, and he shared this album with his wife, Yoko Ono. I'm sure you've heard of Yoko. She's kind of well known. But if you don't know who she is, she's John Lennon's second wife. So, and she's an interesting artist in her own right. She's got a very unique style. Some of her stuff is extremely experimental. I would say generally the stuff on this album is a little more accessible, but we're going to get into that a little bit more. So the first song is called Just Like Starting Over, and this was the first single that was released from the album as well. Lennon had said that he didn't think it was the best song on the album, but that it was a fitting song to put out there that he was back in the music business, and he was ready to undertake whatever he was going to undertake next. And so this song is basically about going back and rekindling the flame. And this is something that's very common for many couples, especially when they've been together a while, they've had kids together, and their lives start to revolve around the kids, or in this case, Sean, their common child. And then they lose that dyad sense of each other. So in this song, Lennon is singing about going on a trip, just the two of them, spending time together and getting back that spark of the early days. One of my own personal marriage and family therapy concepts is that of narrative therapy, where you look at the story of the couple and see what attracted them to each other when they first met, and the things that they liked about each other when they first met. Because a lot of times when couples come in for counseling, they'll be so focused on fighting, or even just on the day-to-day of, gotta get, Sean to soccer practice, we gotta get Billy over to music lessons, we gotta do this, we gotta do that. And they lose sense of their relationship with each other. So it seems like, perhaps unwittingly, Lennon is talking about purposely going on a trip together with Yoko to rekindle that. And that's something that a lot of marriage and family therapists tend to recommend is, you may not have the ability that Lennon and Yoko had to just fly off somewhere, but sometimes it can just be a thing of once a week, we're going to put the kid with the sitter, we're going to have a pizza night, and it's going to be just us, and we're going to have adult time. So that's kind of what, John's talking about here. So something we can all relate to. The second song is by Yoko. These songs generally, there's a few that don't fit this pattern, but it generally goes John, Yoko, with the sense that they're writing letters back and forth to each other, which was something that John had said that he wanted to kind of have the idea of, that they were writing these letters back and forth to each other, and it was chronicling their love story. So the next song is by Yoko. It's called Kiss Kiss Kiss, and it's this song basically about the same sort of thing that Just Like Starting Over is about. It's about finding that passion that they once had and going back to the beginning, and there's a lot of great imagery in this song. Again, one of the things that is often said about double fantasy is stuff like, oh, this is a great half an album, or it's a good album if you skip all the Yoko stuff. But I personally disagree. I think the Yoko stuff it adds to and buoys the Lennon stuff and vice versa. And I do think that there's some merit, at least in my own personal opinion, to the stuff that Yoko put on here. And a lot of the themes echo one another, as explicitly in some points, but implicitly in others. So Kiss 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 is an interesting song. It's, again, just about their relationship together, some stuff about physical intimacy, and just that, going back to the beginning and feeling that same flame, maybe, that she once felt for John when she met him back when she had the apple on the stand and he was hammering a nail into her weird nail hammer exhibit thing back in 1966. So. Then we are back to John again with the song called Clean Up Time, which is a song that in one of his last interviews he forgot the title to. He was saying, it's the Moonlight on the Water song, which is the first line of the song, I believe. And so that's not the name of the song, John. You got it wrong. You titled it. You should know what it is. But, so this song is basically sort of about the same thing as Just Like Starting Over. It's about taking time to focus on the relationship, and it's almost sort of a parallel to something like Cold Turkey, which is a song about John getting cleaned up from heroin. This is basically about cleaning up the relationship and cleaning up himself in a different way, because it is a lot about his house husband years. He takes a point where, make sure this is the song, right song there, he says, the queen is in the counting house, and then the king is in the kitchen. The reverse of that nursery rhyme, because he was performing the house husband role at that point, whereas Yoko was taking care of the business side of things. So they had reversed those gender roles. So he references that here, and it's basically just about him taking time to focus on the relationship above all, and take time for himself and for his relationship, as opposed to letting all those outside things get in the way, one of which maybe was his fame and Beatlemania and all of the things that had been challenges to him ever since the Beatles got big, and a lot of his own trauma. To jump back to Just Like Starting Over for just 1 second, I just thought of it. There's a bell at the very beginning of Just Like Starting Over, and John had consciously said that is the same bell that tolls in the song Mother off of Plastic Ono Band, which is the first traditional John Lennon solo album. And he said that this was showing that he had made it through all of his old trauma and that he was sort of ready to start again. So, an interesting take on that. So basically, there's a lot of the same themes that keep popping up again and again about focusing on that dyad and focusing on the relationship and sort of excluding everything else at that point. This next song after that is Give Me Something, which is Yoko's response song to Clean Up Time, in which she's asking for some sort of emotion, some sort of reaction from him, and basically saying, like, don't give me some fake answer that everything is okay, just give me whatever you got, but it just can't be nothing. And this is actually sort of echoes back to some of the ideas of marriage and family therapy, in which in a lot of relationships one partner will be closed off, and that will be the withdrawer, and the pursuer will be pursuing the withdrawer. So for instance, partner one may be that person who's like, everything's fine, I'm not going to talk about it, forget it, I don't care, it doesn't bother me. And the pursuer would be like, whoa, no, what is it? No, what is it? Come on, come on, come on. And then the withdrawers get so annoyed, they'll be like, shut up! And then it'll keep going like that until they just both drive each other completely batty and they have to go into marriage without therapy. So that's sort of the idea here, where it does sound like in the previous song, John is focusing on himself, but Yoko wants to know what's going on. She wants that reaction from him. She doesn't want the pat answer of everything is okay. So she's asking for something more. So in this case, it seems like John would be a withdrawer, which makes sense given a lot of his previous sort of traumatic experiences that we know about from previous albums, and sort of just the fact that he's somebody who can be very on or off about expressing emotions. There are a lot of points in which he expresses a lot of his emotions musically through other albums. I mean, the whole Plastic Ono Band was based on him doing primal scream therapy, which is all about pure emotion. But there's also that sort of idea that he generally projects forward, where he's very much the, I'm gonna just laugh it off with a joke, I'm not really gonna talk about what I'm really feeling, and so that seems to be kind of what's going on there. Withdrawer, pursuer, give me something is song number 4. After that is another Lennon song, which is I'm Losing You, which was apparently written when John was overseas somewhere. I'm kind of forgetting where he was. And he was trying to call Yoko and he couldn't get through because she was somewhere else in another country. And then he wrote this song out of this frustration of not being able to get in touch with her and kind of letting it sort of hyperbolize itself into this whole idea that he's losing her completely, that he can't connect with her, and this sort of panicked sense, where it's also sort of a bitter idea too. It's just sort of throwing everything to the wind and being concerned that everything's slipping away from him. The answer song to that, which flows in actually really, really well from I'm Losing You, where it goes seamlessly into the next album, this next song, I'm sorry, is I'm Moving On. And the riff to I'm Moving On, actually, to me at least, it sounds a little bit like that song I Miss You by the Rolling Stones. I don't know if I'm sure other people have noticed that too. I don't know if that was a shout out or whatnot, but then that's Yoko's response, where she's saying that she's basically done with John's business and she's moving on. She's tired of his crap, basically. And so it's sort of this where she's sort of actively moving on in that idea, whereas John is more in the passive role in which he feels like it's slipping away from him, but he's not actively doing something to cause it. Whereas Yoko is the more active role in there, where she's choosing to move on because something has frustrated her regarding John. So that's I'm Losing You and I'm Moving On. They're very much two sides of the same coin. And they sort of present the conflict in the middle of this album that is very much about the love between two people, but you can't have love without conflict. And therein lies the conflict, where if this was a romantic comedy, this would be the part where hero and heroine break up and they go off to be maybe with other people, but they always get back together at the end. So, you know. Alright, and now so far we've primarily been talking about John and Yoko. I mean, there's been some nods to John's house husband years, but there's another little player in our little family right here, and that is Sean, who was born October 9th, 1975, on John Lennon's 35th birthday. And this next song is called Beautiful Boy, parenthesis, Darling Boy, And this song is written for Sean. This is kind of like a lullaby. It's like real sad now considering everything that happened. But it's a sweet little song. And this sort of brings it all back together for the end of what was initially side one back when this was a record. And this is the point in which there's actually two John songs sort of back to back on the CD, but on the record it would have ended side one with Beautiful Boy. Now I do want to point out that with Sean in general, there's a lot of hubbub about Sean got all this attention and John's older son Julian didn't get nearly as much attention. But I do want to point out that Julian also has a song. Julian has a couple songs actually. But the song that John wrote for Julian was Good Night off of the White Album. So if you ever want, a Lennon Sons back-to-back mix, you got a couple songs you can put on it. And of course, Hey Jude was written by Paul McCartney about Julian as well. So ultimately, Julian's winning 2-1. But hi Julian, if you're watching this. You're cool. Alright, so that's Beautiful Boy, and that brings us into side 2 of Double Fantasy, in which we start with Watching the Wheels, which was a later single off of Double Fantasy. It was released posthumously, I believe. Watching the Wheels is basically, it's not so much about the John-Yoko dyad, so much as Lennon himself sort of recalibrating against the wishes of the world. And he really takes on all the people who were asking, when are you coming back to the music business? Why aren't you doing what we want you to do? We are the fans. We say we want you to make music. Why are you being a house husband? And John's basically saying, because that's what I feel like doing, and that's what I'm going to do. And that's what Watching the Wheels is all about. It's very much about him taking a step back and worrying about himself and relaxing and watching the wheels, so to speak. After Watching the Wheels, we're back to Yoko again. Hi, Yoko. With Yes, I'm Your Angel, which is this kind of like weird cabaret-ish song. There's the sound effects set you in the scene where there's a bunch of people sort of drinking maybe wine or something like that, clinking glasses and listening to Yoko sing a song to John on his birthday. Again, the dyad, and kind of working together in order to strengthen the relationship, celebrating those little things about themselves. And in that case, the idea of this small relationship between two people being put on a big stage where people were watching it, and the fact that you can hear glasses clinking, you kind of get the idea that it's a fancy gathering, maybe some kind of benefit dinner. And even this small moment of Yoko singing to John is now suddenly put on a big stage for everybody to see, which in a way is what Double Fantasy is. This is two people just kind of broadcasting their relationship for all to see. After Yes, I'm Your Angel is Woman, and this song is sort of a tribute to, this is a John Lennon song by the way, it's sort of a tribute to all the things that women do for men, according to, this is what John Lennon said about it, and looking at things through a different way. He said it's sort of a callback to a song he did with the Beatles called Girl, and he's kind of showing that he's matured now, whereas he had this sort of different relationship in Girl, whereas he's now matured. He looks at his relationship with Yoko in this more mature way, and he had spoken about it in, I believe, the interview he did with Playboy magazine in 1980 as sort of his way of becoming more feminist, because he was influenced by Yoko to be more feminist. So that's sort of his shout out to that. And basically it's for her, but it also seems to be sort of a shout out to women everywhere. So, yay women. Then we have a point where there's an answer song that's not next to the song that it's answering, which is a little bit counterintuitive, because the next song is by Yoko and it's called Beautiful Boys. Now, as you will recall, we ended side 1 with Beautiful Boy, which was about Sean. This one is about both Sean and John and how they're similar, how they're different. This sort of idea of the parallels between men and boys. What's that phrase about? But the only difference between men and boys is the size of their toys. That's kind of what Yoko's sort of going with here. That basically they're both kind of trying to conquer the world, maybe not always trying to do it in the best way, but that's sort of Yoko's take on it, and she echoes a lot of the sentiments that John put in his song, except it's not as much like of a lullaby type of deal. It's more like musings on a topic. It's still a good song though. Then we've got John's last song on the album, which is Dear Yoko. If y'all remember back on Imagine, there's a song called Oh Yoko. The theme is pretty similar, except this is more of a letter, and it's talking about how he doesn't want to go anywhere without Yoko beside him, that they're very close, that every time that she's away from him, he misses her. So maybe they're a little bit entwined. Maybe they could use some time apart from the marriage and family therapy idea. They maybe need to develop separate interests too a little bit, but, you know, whatever makes them happy ultimately. If it's what's working for them, then, you know, you go, John and Yoko. But this song is basically just, again, it's a letter, and the whole idea was that it was letters to each other, and this is really takes that idea and makes it sort of explicit, because it's Dear Yoko. It's kind of a letter that he'd be writing to her when she'd be away from him, telling her about how much he missed her, and that she was there to sit back with him. And so it's basically Dear Yoko. After that is Every Man Has a Woman Who Loves Him, which is Yoko again. And this is, again, sort of going from the specific, sort of the same kind of thing with Beautiful Boy versus Beautiful Boys, where it went from the specific, Sean, to the less specific, John and Sean, to basically every dude everywhere. Same kind of thing with Every Man Has a Woman Who Loves Him, taking their own relationship and expanding it outward, that there basically are thousands of John and Yokos all over the galaxy, basically. And not only John and Yokos, because a couple years ago, this might have been like 10 years ago, so it was relatively recent, Yoko re-recorded the song in 2 other versions. Every man has a man who loves him, and every woman has a woman who loves her. So it's basically for couples everywhere. Everybody's got somebody that loves them, and that they're hopefully going to find them and have the same kind of love that John and Yoko have. That's what Yoko wishes for everybody. And then rounding out the original album is a Yoko song called Hard Times Are Over, which has this sort of feeling to it, almost kind of, if you're familiar with the musical Annie, not the movie, or movies, the movie, no, not the musical of Annie. It ends with a song called A New Deal for Christmas, where FDR comes out and everyone sings about how there's a new deal now and everything's going to be good. It kind of has that same general feel, this sort of idea that they've been through the hard times, but it's bright times ahead, and it's all going to be good here on out. Then there's some bonus tracks on this version of Double Fantasy that I have. And now if you get the version on Spotify, the bonus tracks are not on Spotify, which makes me very sad because I like these bonus tracks. And the first bonus track is Help Me to Help Myself, which is just this short song that John was working on at his time of death. And it's just not a very long song. It's kind of like a snippet, basically. And he goes back on that old adage about the Lord helps those who help themselves. And he kind of sings about that he wants to help himself in order to continue to be better. Going back to this theme of working on oneself in order to work on a relationship. After that is Walking on Thin Ice, which was the song that John and Yoko were in the studio mixing on the day that John died. Now, on YouTube, I've seen some debate about whether or not this song was on Double Fantasy. It was not on the original version of Double Fantasy. It's a bonus track. But I believe some people may have heard it prior to John's death because there was a few early mixes floating around that I think were played in some of John's radio interviews. So if you think you heard it prior to December 8th, 1980, you might not be wrong. I believe they did play some early mixes, but they were doing the final mixes on December 8th, 1980. So that's, I'm Walking on Thin Ice is just another Yoko song. And it's got this idea of going against the odds even though you know you shouldn't, and kind of an ironic song given the circumstances with the mental images of, walking off thin ice, that if you make a wrong step, then everything can change for you. And it's a good song. It's got some interesting stuff going on in it. Yoko actually did this song live at the Amnesty concert in 1985, and there's video footage of it online, so you can find that. And then lastly, it's just Central Park Stroll, parentheses, dialogue, which is literally just John and Yoko talking about walking through Central Park for like 5 seconds. Now this CD version that I have, it's very pretty and there's some cool stuff in it. Also, the official title for Double Fantasy is Double Fantasy, a Heart Play by John Lennon and Yoko Ono. So kind of the idea that it's almost a concept album, and there's some pictures of them. And John had said something to the effect of that if we put different names on ourselves and we were Tommy and I forget who he said for that, but if like we were concept album characters and we released this album, people wouldn't have a problem with it. But because we're doing it as John Lennon and Yoko Ono, all these people are going to have a problem with it. And people did have a problem with it. The early reviews for Double Fantasy were scathing on the whole. They said things like they think that anyone other than them cares about John Lennon and Yoko Ono, and like basically saying that the album was self-indulgent, that like no one should buy it, that it wasn't any good, that somebody called it a misogynist album because they said that it was a record of Lennon being emasculated by Yoko Ono. All kinds of stuff like that, basically trying to say that Lennon wasn't a true artist anymore and that Yoko had kind of taken him over and all this kind of stuff. These were the early reviews that came out when the album was released November 17th, 1980. A lot of people then changed their tune after December 8th, 1980 because now Lennon died tragically and now suddenly they were like, oh, this is a great album. Oh, look at the artistry of the album. It's so brave, and Lennon, he has so much to say about his relationship with Yoko. Really? Really? So basically, the opinions changed on this album, partially due to Lennon's death. I, unfortunately, was born after John Lennon's death, so I can only kind of look at it in the vein of which I listened to it, knowing that it was the last album, but I think it is still an excellent album. I think it has a lot of merit. It's not necessarily my favorite. I'd probably, put something like Imagine up there at my favorite album, but I do think there's a lot of really good songs on here from both John and Yoko, and I think that if it had to be their last album, well, his last album, then I think he went out on top. And I think he went out doing stuff that he really wanted to do. There's been a lot of criticism of, oh, John just came back and did all this corny stuff with Yoko and it's not as brave anymore. But this stuff was brave too, because people didn't like it. So there's a certain bravery in doing something people are going to have a problem with. People have a problem with this. So ultimately I say Double Fantasy is a good album. Now I've kind of tiptoed around the whole circumstances of Lennon's death. And all I'm going to say about that is, here's my review of Catcher in the Rye. It sucked. So anyway, back to wrapping up this album. I would definitely recommend it. If you're a Lennon fan, you're going to find songs that you know on it. Because something like Washing the Wheels or Woman, they're two pretty popular hits. So you're not going to be completely out of your depth here and listening to a whole lot of stuff that you're not familiar with. If you started with something like Sometime in New York City or even Plastic Ono Band, even though that had some well-known singles on it, it's still kind of out there. Basically, it's pretty accessible. The songs are all pretty accessible. It's not like weird, straight-up experimental stuff on either end. And if you don't like Yoko, you can skip over her stuff. Again, it's not like Sometime in New York City where there's a lot of songs where it's John and Yoko together. You kind of skip around if or if you only like Yoko and you don't like John Lennon at all, you think he's corporate or whatever, and you are only about Yoko, you can just skip around to the Yoko songs. That's what CDs are for, or Spotify, or whatever you got. Basically, it's a good album. I think it says a lot about the dynamics between couples. I don't know that any other couples have really done an album like this so far. They might have since. But I think it's a fitting testament to Lennon's legacy. So definitely check it out. It should be available at anywhere you buy music. Like I said, there's a version on Spotify that doesn't have bonus tracks. So far, this version of Walking on Thin Ice isn't really on Spotify. There's some other remixes of it. So you may have to go looking for Walking on Thin Ice if you don't buy the CD version of it. So if you can get this version, I definitely recommend it. Anyway, so that's Double Fantasy. I'm thinking for my next one, I'm actually going to go into a slightly different genre and review a more R&B, more contemporary type of album, and take a look at an album by a lesser known artist who should really get some more credit, Vivi Brown, and her album Traveling Like the Light, which is the first album I really know from her. But, just to wrap it up, as always, donate to the Mercury Phoenix Trust. And, there's a number of different charities John and Yoko did. I can't think exactly of a specific one off the moment, but they did a lot of work with, like, mental health and stuff like that. So I'm sure you can find something to investigate. I'll have a specific one for you next time, probably. Anyway, so thank you for tuning in to Album Analysis. This was Double Fantasy. And next time it'll be Traveling Like the Light by Vivi Brown. Bye.